Hello friends, welcome to the China Physical channel. We are going to start our first lesson of UGC NET 2000, 2019. It's a first lesson about the wandering of the nations, 450 to 550 AD. So we are going to start this lesson. Our first lesson begins from the centuries that followed the birth of Christ, when the Roman Empire was beginning to loosen her iron grip upon the outpost of her colonies, Europe awoke to the fact that she was no longer a child in leading strings, that she was ready to go out and make her own countries and settle where she willed. Thus there began the restless movement that we call the wandering of the nations. We trace its progress indistinctly at times, but unmistakable enough in that earliest form of history book. The songs and poems sung and recited and handed down from one generation to another. The nations the nations moved in tribes mainly towards the west and south, sometimes because they needed room for free expansion, more fertile soil, new foes to conquer, sometimes iron sheer love of movement and adventure. But often they were forced to move westward by the growing pressure of the hordes of Hun advancing from the advancing from the east, which, as in the days of Attila, destroyed all upon which they laid their hands. Full often, says one of their lays, the whizzing shaft and felling spear flew from the tribes about the Vistula against the grim foes, the seeking to avenge their warriors and their wives. So the wandering tribes. Little by little, some of these migratory tribes stand out by name in connection with some hero chieftain of their race. Offa ruled the Angles, Alevi, the Danes, and though Alevi was of all men the proudest, yet over Offa he never proved a conqueror, and Offa, first among men, while yet a lad, won the greatest of the kingdoms. None at his age ever won greater renown with his sword. He extended his borders against the Myrings, my Margings, and from henceforth the Angles and Swift held away held sway. For a long time to come, however, these will be mere names. We shall have no clear idea of the characteristic of the nations nor of the limits of their territories. We see them all as barely civilized, their religions a vacuum, nature worship filled with a dread of darkness and night, and dim, unknown region peopled by them with witches and warlocks, monsters and water sprites. Their one clear faith was a trust in the sword and breastplate, the shield wall, and the iron arrow. They slept with their weapons in their hand, and their highest office was the defense of their leader in the fight. The Roman obstruction. The Roman obstruction, as these Pharisee tribes moved west and south during the 3rd and 4th centuries of the Christian era, they presently found their way obstructed if not altogether barred by the legion of the Rome. We have no clear mention of the latter in this early literature, though constant mention is made of the nomads by the Roman historians, who as a rule do not trouble to distinguish between them in any way, but call them all Germans. The chief effect of the Roman abstraction was to increase the pressure and so to argument. the restlessness and the agitation of the wandering tribes, causing them to break through one direction or another, or to turn their attention to lands hitherto hitho- hitherto unknown influence of the sea. Hence, it came about that at a period of when the tribe rather than the family had developed as the center of the social world of that age. Some particularly enterprising hordes had settled to some extent in the lands lying about the rivers Elbe and Weser, as well as to the north of this in the country we now call Denmark, finding there a long sea border they had learned to build and to navigate their black boats, and in these they raced to and fro over the stormy seas and become masters of what their minstrels love to call the swan path. From the earliest dawn of their history, the sea has always held a, a particular fascination for our forefathers. They may grumble at the hardship of a seafaring life, much as our sailors do nowadays, but of their own free will they return to it again and again. On the dark wave says the seafarer, care sighed hot about my heart while hunger within tore out the vitals of me sea weary. But though his hands may be numbed and frozen, he strives to keep the prow to the overwhelming waters. Though his feet are bound in icy fetters by the frost and icy icicles hang about him, while the hell flies by in shower, yet he is nothing daunted. Strong is the tested to him who long explores the sea road. He boasts and returns again to his battle with the deep in search of the walrus, walrus and whale and seal. Invasion of Britain. Soon the narrow seas become but a bridge leading them to a land new desire, for they have discovered an island known as Britain, an island whose green pastures, well-watered fields and convenient coastline opened up excellent prospects for a future dwelling place. Soon narrow seas become but a bridge leading to a land of new desire, for they have discovered an island known as Britain, an island whose green pastures, well-watered fields and convenient coastline opened up excellent prospects for a future dwelling, dwelling, developing place. At the first, a faint resistance is offered to their advance. A certain officer, known as the Count of the Saxon Shore, has been by the Roman overseers of past days to guard the east and the southeast coast against invasion, but his effort avail nothing against the increasing number of the newcomers, and he has little support from the inhabitants themselves, for by this time the Britons, once so fierce and warlike in face of the Roman conqueror, have under that conqueror strict rule ground tamer and more docile. They are turned to they are torn to by quarrels among themselves and by cruel attacks from foemen of the north and west, whom they call Picts and Scots. They even welcome the rovers from across the North Sea at the times and make effort to enlist their help against these mysterious northerners. But they soon find that in a contest between wild beasts, the sheep stand sorry chance of safety, and before the end of the 5th century, these fierce and impious whelps from the lair of the barbarian lioness, whom they dreaded more than death itself, have made Britain to a very large extent their own. In earliest chronicles written by monks after the events took place from information and tradition handed down from father to son or gathered from the minstrel song and saga. We get a few scant records of invasion. We hear how the Velas, the Welshmen, or foreigners as the invaders called them strenuously opposed the first onset of the barbarian chieftains in the year 455, but also to how 2 years later they fled in terror from Kent and fell back on London. Later on, the Welsh fled the English like fire, and Britain was devastated at the hands of the newcomers. One chronicler tells how the cunning foe proposed a truce and offered a banquet to the Britons, in which each guest and offered a banquet to the Britons, in which each guest sat between Saxons at the a given signal. Knives were drawn, and each hapless Briton was laid low. Others speak of massacres, starvation, wholesale surrender, the slaughter of the priest at the altar, the destruction of a church and monastery, the cruel fate of such Roman cities as Bath and Chester. Conquest of Britain. For by the middle of the 6th century, the Saxons raiders had conquered the south and Midlands and were fast driving the Britons over the moorlands of Devon and the hills of the west into what we now call Cornwall and Wales. Bitter is the lament of one of their native poets for the white town of Uriconium by the Wrekin. The white town between True and Trod wide. More common was the broken shield coming from battle than the ox at eventide. More common was the blood upon the grass than the furrow made by the plough. The pages of early English literature are full descriptions of the way in which these forefathers of the English nation advanced in the battle against those whom they set out to conquer. So large a place indeed is occupied by such details that we might almost be tempted to see in them nothing but a great tribal army, always at war, and knowing no life that of the camp. We hear the responsive shout of the barons and Thegans as their leader raising his shield aloft bids them bear themselves well in the fight. We hear the clash of shields as they lock together to form a wall of defense. The rattles of the iron tipped, the arrow or flunks javelin flung javelin, the rip of the cloven helmet or chain armor, the crash of the battle axe, the thuds of horses' hoofs as the vanquished flee from field, and always in grim, poetic veins. The chronicler reminds of us the raven, due nipped, nipped, or as we should say, with watering mouth, awaiting his prey, singing a grisly war song while the grey wolf lurks on the outskirts of the field. No doubt it was this year's warfare of treachery, of bloodshed. The seeds were sown of finer things, the seeds patriotism of self-sacrifice, of loyalty to one's overlord, of discipline and self-control. But had there been no other side to their existence, we might well think of our forefathers as merely a race of bloodthirsty savages. And marvels that within 150 years after the beginning of invasion, we find an England where very fairly settled, open to civilizing influence, and ready to listen to the message of Christianity, which was bring to actual civilization. Give some causes of the invasion